5 years ago, Emma looked me straight in the eye and said she couldn't live in poverty anymore. She packed her designer bags that I'd saved months to buy her, walked out of our tiny apartment above Murphy's coffee shop, and moved into a mansion in the West Hills with Marcus Wellington, a real estate mogul worth $40 million. She said I was a dreamer who would never amount to anything, that my tech startup ideas were fantasies, and that she deserved better than ramen dinners and secondhand furniture. Last month, she showed up at my office downtown, tears streaming down her face, begging me to take her back. The only problem was the wedding ring on my finger and the photo of my wife Rachel and our daughter Sophie sitting on my desk. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story really begins 7 years ago, when Emma and I were both 25 and thought we could conquer the world together. We met at Portland State University during our final semester, both studying business but with completely different visions of success. I was the guy who spent every free moment in the computer lab, sketching out ideas for apps that could revolutionize how small businesses manage their inventory. Emma was brilliant with marketing, had this incredible ability to sell ice to penguins, and when she smiled, the whole room seemed to light up. Our first apartment was a cramped studio above Murphy's coffee shop in the Hawthorne District. The place was barely 600 square feet, with a kitchenette that consisted of 2 burners and a mini-fridge that made more noise than a freight train. The bathroom was so small you had to step into the shower to close the door, and our bed was a mattress on the floor that we'd bought from a garage sale for $30. But Emma and I, we made it feel like a palace. Every morning, the smell of freshly roasted coffee would drift up through the floorboards, and Emma would joke that we had the best alarm clock in Portland. She'd wake up first, always did, and I'd find her by the tiny window that overlooked the street, watching the early commuters rush by with their expensive suits and their hurried expressions. She'd have this thoughtful look on her face, like she was studying a different species. Those early days, we were a team. Emma believed in my vision for the inventory management software, even when my own parents thought I was wasting my degree. She'd sit beside me for hours while I coded, bringing me coffee and sandwiches, asking questions about algorithms she didn't understand but wanted to learn about anyway. When I'd get frustrated because a program wouldn't run correctly, she'd remind me that every successful entrepreneur had moments of doubt. We'd talk about our future like it was a sure thing. Emma would describe the house we'd buy someday. Nothing fancy. It's just a place with a real kitchen where she could host dinner parties for our friends. She wanted a garden where she could grow herbs and vegetables, and a home office where I could work on my projects without using the kitchen table as a desk. We'd plan vacations to places we'd only seen in travel magazines. Aunt Emma would cut out pictures of destinations and tape them to our bathroom mirror as motivation. The inventory software was my baby, and Emma was its biggest cheerleader. She helped me create the business plan, researching potential clients and competitors, while I focused on the technical side. We called our company Chen Solutions, and Emma designed our first logo on her laptop using free software she'd downloaded. It wasn't professional, but it was ours, and every time I saw it on our business cards, I felt like we were building something important together. Our social life revolved around other young couples who were also struggling to make it in Portland. Tyler, my younger brother, was finishing his degree in graphic design and would come over for dinner at least twice a week. Emma always made sure there was enough food, even if it meant she and I ate smaller portions. She had this way of making everyone feel welcome in our tiny space. Rearranging furniture so we could fit 6 people around our folding table for poker nights and potluck dinners. Jake Morrison became my closest friend during this time. He was working as a junior developer at a mid-sized company downtown, but he had entrepreneurial dreams too. Jake and I would spend weekends brainstorming business ideas while Emma and Jake's girlfriend Sarah would plan double dates that fit our shoestring budgets. We'd go hiking at Multnomah Falls, have picnics at Pioneer Courthouse Square, or catch happy hour specials at dive bars where the drinks were cheap and the atmosphere was friendly. Emma had this infectious optimism that made our financial struggles feel temporary. When our car broke down and we couldn't afford repairs, she suggested we try living car-free for a month and use the bus system as an adventure. When our heating bill was higher than expected one winter, she turned it into a game, seeing how cozy we could make the apartment with extra blankets and hot chocolate. She had this ability to find the positive side of any situation, and it made me believe that together we could handle anything life threw at us. The first version of my inventory software was clunky and limited, but it worked. Emma convinced Murphy, the coffee shop owner downstairs, to let us test it on his business. She promised him a free month of service if he'd give us feedback on the user experience. Murphy agreed, partly because he liked us as tenants, partly because Emma had that persuasive charm that made people want to help her succeed. The test run with Murphy's coffee shop was a success. The software helped him track his coffee bean inventory more efficiently, reducing waste and improving his ordering process. Word spread to other small business owners in the Hawthorne District, and within 6 months, we had 12 paying clients. The revenue wasn't much, barely enough to cover our basic expenses, but it was proof that Chen Solutions could work. Emma quit her part-time job at a retail store to focus on sales and marketing for our company. She was a natural at building relationships with potential clients, understanding their pain points, and explaining how our software could solve their problems. While I continued developing and improving the technical aspects, Emma handled everything from customer service to invoicing. We were a perfect partnership, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. Our daily routine during those early months was intense but fulfilling. I'd wake up at 6 in the morning to code before Emma got up, taking advantage of the quiet hours when my mind was sharpest. Emma would handle client calls and follow-ups throughout the day, often working from coffee shops around the city because our internet connection at home was unreliable. Evenings were for planning and strategy sessions, sitting at our kitchen table with notebooks and laptops, mapping out our next moves. The apartment that once felt cozy started to feel cramped as our business grew. Emma's marketing materials were stacked on every available surface, and my computer equipment had taken over the living room. We'd joke about being the most successful homeless entrepreneurs in Portland, but underneath the humor, I could sense Emma's growing frustration with our living situation. Her friends from college were getting married, buying houses, and posting photos of their new cars and vacation trips on social media. Emma would scroll through these updates with a smile, but I noticed how long she'd linger on certain posts, studying the details of someone's new kitchen or their weekend getaway to wine country. When I'd ask her about it, she'd shrug and say she was happy for them, but I could tell something was shifting in her perspective. The first crack in our foundation appeared during a dinner party at our friends Mark and Jennifer's new condo in the Pearl District. Their place was everything ours wasn't: spacious, modern, professionally decorated, with a kitchen that could accommodate more than 2 people at once. Mark worked in finance, and Jennifer was a marketing manager at a large corporation. They'd been together for the same amount of time as Emma and me, but their financial situation was completely different. During dinner, the conversation turned to real estate and investment opportunities. Mark and Jennifer talked about their plans to buy a house in the suburbs within the next 2 years, maybe start a family once they were settled. Other couples shared similar timelines and goals, all of which seemed to revolve around stable incomes and predictable career advancement. When someone asked about our plans, Emma hesitated before answering. She talked about Chen Solutions and our growing client base, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She mentioned the possibility of expanding to other cities, maybe hiring our first employee within the year, but compared to everyone else's concrete plans, our future sounded vague and risky. On the bus ride home that night, Emma was quieter than usual. When I asked her what she was thinking about, she said she wondered sometimes if we were being realistic about our timeline for success. She pointed out that most successful tech companies took years to become profitable, and we were still essentially living paycheck to paycheck, dependent on a handful of small clients who could cancel their service at any time. I tried to reassure her by talking about the progress we'd made and the potential for growth. But Emma's concerns weren't entirely about the business. She was starting to question whether we were on the right path for the life she wanted to build. The apartment that once felt romantic now felt limiting. The financial uncertainty that once felt like an adventure now felt like an obstacle to the future she'd imagined. That conversation was the beginning of a subtle but persistent tension between us. Emma continued to work hard for Chen's Solutions, but I could sense her growing impatience with our slow progress. She'd make comments about other people our age who seemed to have their lives figured out. Or she'd mention job opportunities at established companies that offered benefits and steady paychecks. I was so focused on building our business that I didn't fully understand how Emma's perspective was changing. I thought her occasional frustration was just stress from the workload, not a fundamental shift in her priorities. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The conversations I should have taken more seriously. And the growing distance between the future I was working toward and the life Emma was starting to want. The last truly happy memory I have of us together was a Saturday in early spring, about 6 months before she left. We'd landed our biggest client yet, a local restaurant chain that wanted to implement our inventory system across all 5 locations. Emma had negotiated the contract, and I'd spent weeks customizing the software to meet their specific needs. When the deal was finalized, we celebrated by splurging on dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, something we hadn't done in months. That night, walking home through the Hawthorne District, Emma took my hand and said she was proud of what we'd built together. She talked about how far we'd come from those early days of eating ramen every night and worrying about making rent. For a moment, it felt like we were back on the same page, working toward the same goals, believing in the same future. But even then, I could sense something had changed in Emma. The confidence she'd once had in our partnership felt more forced, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. The dreams we'd shared about our future together had been replaced by more practical concerns about timelines and financial security. The woman who once saw our struggles as temporary stepping stones was starting to see them as permanent obstacles. Within 3 months of that celebration dinner, Emma would meet Marcus Wellington at a networking event downtown. Within 6 months, she'd be gone, leaving behind the life we'd built together and the dreams we'd shared. But that night, walking home hand in hand through our neighborhood, I still believed that love and hard work were enough to overcome any challenge. I still believed that Emma and I were building something that would last forever. The Portland Tech Network Mixer at the downtown Hilton was supposed to be a routine networking event for Chen's Solutions. Emma had convinced me that we needed to expand our professional contacts beyond the small business community in Hawthorne District. She'd spent weeks preparing for the event, researching attendees and practicing her elevator pitch in front of our bathroom mirror. I remember watching her get ready that Thursday evening, adjusting her black blazer and checking her makeup one final time. The event was unlike anything we'd attended before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ballroom was filled with people wearing expensive suits and designer dresses, discussing venture capital deals and acquisition strategies over cocktails that cost more than we typically spent on groceries in a week. Crowd with confidence I'd rarely seen from her, introducing herself to executives and entrepreneurs with the kind of polished professionalism that seemed to come naturally. I was talking with a group of software developers near the appetizer table when I noticed Emma across the room, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Even from a distance, I could see the way she was leaning forward, completely focused on whatever he was saying. Her laugh carried across the room, different from her usual laugh, more sophisticated somehow. Marcus Wellington commanded attention. Wherever he went that evening, was the kind of man who seemed to own every room he entered, with salt and pepper hair that looked professionally styled, and a watch that probably cost more than our annual rent. When he spoke, people gathered around him like he was sharing state secrets. His business card identified him as the founder and CEO of Wellington Properties, a commercial real estate empire that owned half the office buildings in downtown Portland. The conversation I was having about database optimization suddenly felt trivial compared to whatever discussion was happening between Emma and Marcus. I watched as he handed her his business card, holding eye contact longer than seemed necessary for a professional exchange. Emma smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months, the same radiant expression she'd worn during our early days together when everything felt possible. When the networking portion of the event ended and the formal presentations began, Emma returned to my side, but something had shifted in her demeanor. She seemed distracted during the keynote speech about emerging technologies, frequently checking her phone and glancing around the room. When I asked her about the conversation with Marcus, she described it as a potential business opportunity, explaining that Wellington Properties was looking for inventory management solutions for their property management division. The drive home that night was quieter than usual. Emma stared out the passenger window as we navigated through downtown traffic, lost in thought. When I tried to engage her in conversation about the other contacts we'd made or the potential leads we'd discovered, her responses were brief and distracted. She seemed to be processing something significant, though I couldn't understand what had made such an impression on her. Over the following days, Emma's behavior became increasingly unusual. She started paying more attention to her appearance, spending extra time on her hair and makeup. Even when we were just working from home, she bought new clothes, explaining that we needed to project a more professional image if we wanted to attract larger clients. The outfits were more expensive than our usual budget allowed. But Emma insisted they were necessary investments in our company's future. The first official meeting with Wellington Properties took place the following week at their headquarters. In the Pearl District, the building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, with a lobby that looked like something from a luxury hotel. Emma insisted on handling the meeting alone, claiming that my technical expertise wasn't necessary for the initial consultation. She spent hours preparing her presentation, practicing in front of our mirror, and researching Marcus's business background. When Emma returned from that meeting, she was practically glowing with excitement. She described Marcus as a visionary entrepreneur who understood the value of innovative solutions. According to her account, he was impressed with Chen's solutions. Potential and interested in not just using our software, but potentially investing in our company's expansion. The meeting had lasted 3 hours, much longer than a typical client consultation. And they discussed everything from our current client base to our long-term growth strategies. The follow-up meetings became a weekly occurrence. Emma would dress carefully for each appointment, leaving our apartment with a confidence I hadn't seen since our early days together. She'd return hours later, full of stories about Marcus's business insights and his suggestions for improving our company. He was mentoring her, she explained, teaching her about scaling a business and navigating the corporate world. I started to feel left out of these conversations. Emma would mention details about Marcus's other business ventures, his travel schedule, and his perspectives on various industry trends. She knew that he'd started his real estate empire with a single apartment building he'd purchased at 28, that he'd been featured on the cover of Portland Business Journal twice, and that he collected vintage wines as a hobby. These personal details seemed beyond what would typically be shared in professional meetings. The distance between Emma and me grew gradually, like a slow leak in a tire that you don't notice until it's completely flat. She became less interested in our evening strategy sessions, often claiming she was too tired to focus on business planning. When I'd share updates about our existing clients or ideas for new features, she'd listen politely, but without the enthusiasm she used to show. Her attention seemed to be elsewhere, focused on opportunities and possibilities that didn't include me. The first major argument happened on a Friday evening in late October. Emma had spent the entire day at another meeting with Marcus, this time at an upscale restaurant in the West Hills rather than his office. When I asked about the change in venue, she explained that Marcus preferred to conduct business in relaxed environments where they could have in-depth conversations without office interruptions. I'd spent the day working on a software update that one of our restaurant clients had requested, a complex modification that had taken me 12 hours to complete successfully. I was excited to share the breakthrough with Emma, but when she arrived home, she seemed distracted and uninterested in hearing about my progress. Instead, she wanted to talk about Marcus's suggestion that we consider relocating our business to a professional office space. The idea caught me off guard. Our apartment setup was unconventional, but it worked for our current needs and kept our overhead costs minimal. Moving to a commercial office would require a significant financial investment that we weren't prepared to make. When I expressed these concerns, Emma became frustrated, arguing that we needed to think bigger if we wanted to attract serious investors. She'd never talked about investors before our interactions with Marcus began. Our original plan had been to grow organically, reinvesting our profits to gradually expand our client base and improve our software. The pressure to scale quickly was a new development. I couldn't understand where it was coming from, or why it had become so important to Emma. The conversation escalated when I suggested that Marcus might be influencing her perspective in ways that weren't necessarily beneficial for our company. Emma reacted defensively, accusing me of being jealous of Marcus's success and resistant to growth opportunities. She said I was thinking too small, content with our modest progress when we could be building something much larger. That night, we went to bed angry, lying on opposite sides of our mattress without saying goodnight. I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how our partnership had become so strained. Emma faced the wall, scrolling through her phone until well past midnight. I could see the glow of the screen reflecting off the wall, and I wondered what she was reading that was keeping her awake. The weekend brought a temporary truce, but the underlying tension remained. Emma suggested we visit Tyler for Sunday dinner, something we'd done regularly for months. My brother had recently moved into a small house in southeast Portland, proud to finally have his own space after years of roommate situations. The evening started normally with Tyler showing us his latest graphic design projects and Emma helping prepare dinner in his tiny kitchen. But during dinner, the conversation turned to career goals and financial planning. Tyler mentioned that he was considering taking a full-time position at a marketing agency, trading some creative freedom for the security of a steady paycheck and health benefits. Emma responded with unusual intensity, talking about the importance of financial stability and the risks of depending on unpredictable income sources. I was surprised by her perspective, since financial uncertainty had never seemed to bother her before. When Tyler asked about Chen's Solutions' progress, Emma's response was noticeably different from how she'd discussed our business in the past. Instead of focusing on our successes and growth potential, she emphasized the challenges and limitations we faced as a small company in a competitive market. Tyler sensed the tension between Emma and me, though he was too polite to address it. Directly after dinner, while Emma was in the bathroom, he asked if everything was okay between us. I found myself struggling to answer, unsure how to explain the changes I'd noticed without sounding paranoid or insecure. I told him we were dealing with some business stress, which was technically true, though it didn't capture the full complexity of what was happening. The drive home from Tyler's house was uncomfortably quiet. Emma seemed lost in thought, occasionally checking her phone when we stopped at traffic lights. I tried to start a conversation about Tyler's new house and his job prospects, but her responses were distracted and brief. By the time we reached our apartment, the silence between us felt heavy and unnatural. That Sunday night marked a turning point in our relationship, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Emma began spending more time on her phone, often stepping outside to take calls that she claimed were work-related. She started going to networking events and business meets that she'd attend alone, explaining that I needed to focus on software development while she handled business development. The gifts started appearing the following week. Small things at first, items that Emma claimed she'd purchased for herself with money from her clothing budget. A new handbag that looked more and more expensive than anything she'd owned before. Jewelry that seemed too sophisticated for her usual style. When I complimented these additions to her wardrobe, she'd deflect with vague explanations about finding good deals or treating herself after successful client meetings. Jake Morrison noticed the changes in Emma before I was willing to acknowledge them. During one of our weekly coffee meetings, he asked if everything was going well with our relationship. Jake had known Emma almost as long as I had, and he could sense that something had shifted in her behavior. When I described the increased focus on networking and business development, Jake expressed concern about the time Emma was spending away from our core business operations. His questions forced me to confront details I'd been trying to ignore. Emma's extended absences, her new clothes and accessories, her decreased interest in our existing clients, and her growing emphasis on expansion and investment opportunities. Jake didn't directly suggest that Emma might be involved with someone else, but his concerns made me start paying closer attention to patterns I'd been overlooking. The revelation came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in early November. Emma had told me she was attending a women's entrepreneurship workshop downtown, an event that was supposed to end at 9 o'clock. When 10:30 passed without any communication from her, I began to worry. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By 11 o'clock, I was concerned enough to drive downtown and look for her. I found Emma's car parked outside Le Bernardine, one of Portland's most expensive restaurants. Through the large windows, I could see her sitting at a corner table with Marcus Wellington. They weren't discussing business. Emma was leaning across the table, her hand resting on Marcus's arm, laughing at something he'd said. The body language between them was intimate and familiar, nothing like the professional relationship Emma had described. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching them through the restaurant window. Marcus reached across the table and touched Emma's face, a gesture so tender and personal that it made my stomach turn. Emma didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes and smiled, the same expression she'd worn during our most romantic moments together. When Marcus signaled for the check, Emma gathered her purse and coat, moving with the comfortable ease of someone who'd done this many times before. I drove home before they left the restaurant, not wanting to confront them in public, but needing time to process what I'd witnessed. The evidence was undeniable, but part of me still hoped there was an explanation that would preserve what Emma and I had built together. I waited in our apartment until nearly 1 in the morning, rehearsing different ways to ask Emma about her evening. When Emma finally came home, she was glowing with happiness, humming quietly as she hung up her coat. Her explanation for the late evening was elaborate and detailed, describing the networking workshop, the inspirational speakers, and the extended conversation she'd had with other women entrepreneurs afterward. She apologized for not calling, claiming that her phone battery had died and she'd lost track of time. Listened to her story without interrupting, knowing that every word was a lie. The woman I'd planned to spend my life with was standing in our tiny kitchen, describing an evening that had never happened, protecting a relationship that was destroying everything we'd built together. The foundation of trust that had supported our partnership, both personal and professional, was completely gone. That night, lying beside Emma while she slept peacefully, I understood that our relationship was over. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the partner who'd believed in our dreams and worked beside me to build something meaningful, had been replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The future we'd planned together, the life we'd been building in our small apartment above Murphy's coffee shop, was ending not with an argument or a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet recognition that Emma had already chosen a different path. The confrontation I'd been dreading happened on a cold December morning while Emma was getting dressed for another supposed client meeting. She'd been spending more time getting ready lately, carefully applying makeup and choosing outfits. That seemed too formal for the small businesses we typically worked with. I watched her select a silk blouse I'd never seen before, one that must have cost more than we usually spent on clothes in 3 months. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The weight of knowing about her relationship with Marcus while she continued, lying to my face, had become unbearable. When she reached for her car keys, I finally spoke up, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "Emma, we need to talk about Marcus Wellington." She froze for just a moment, her hand halfway to the key hook. By our door, when she turned around, I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate how much I might know and what story would work best. The pause lasted only seconds, but it confirmed everything I'd suspected. "What about Marcus?" she asked, attempting the same casual tone she'd been using for weeks. "He's been incredibly helpful with expanding our business connections. I told you about the potential investment opportunities he's been sharing with us. I saw you with him at Le Bernardine 3 weeks ago." The words came out more bluntly than I'd planned, but there was no gentle way to reveal that I'd discovered her deception. "You were holding hands across the table." That didn't look like a business meeting to me. Emma's face went through a series of expressions, from surprise to guilt to something that looked almost like relief. She sat down heavily on our second-hand couch, finally dropping the pretense that had been exhausting both of us. For a long moment, she stared at her hands, and I could see her struggling with how much truth she was willing to share. "Alex, I never meant for this to happen," she began, her voice softer than it had been in months. "When I met Marcus, he was just supposed to be a potential client, but he showed me possibilities I'd never considered before. He understands business in a way that's completely different from what we've been doing. I sat across from her, waiting for her to continue, though. Part of me didn't want to hear the rest. Emma looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but they seemed more like tears of frustration than genuine sadness about our relationship ending. Marcus has offered me a position with Wellington Properties. It's a real job, Alex, with a salary. And benefits and opportunities for advancement? I wouldn't have to worry about whether we'll make rent next month or whether our clients will pay their invoices on time. I could have a predictable life with actual security. The job offer wasn't the most painful revelation. I'd suspected that Marcus was providing Emma with more than just business advice. What hurt was the way she described our life together as something she needed to escape from, as if the dreams we'd shared had become a burden rather than a partnership. Emma continued talking, explaining how Marcus had been mentoring her in business strategy and showing her what success could look like with the right resources and connections. She talked about the networking events he'd introduced her to, the investment opportunities he'd explained, and the lifestyle that became possible when you weren't constantly struggling to make ends meet. What about Chen's solutions? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. What about everything we've built together over the past 2 years? Emma looked around our small apartment, taking in the makeshift office setup, the second-hand furniture, the cramped kitchen, where we'd planned our future over countless dinners. Her expression suggested that she no longer saw potential in what we'd created, only limitations and frustrations. Alex, we've been working so hard for so long, and what do we have to show for it? We're still living in the same tiny apartment, still worrying about money every month, still hoping that the next client will be the one that changes everything. I'm 27 years old, and I want to know that my future is secure. The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Emma admitted that her feelings for Marcus had developed over several months, beginning with admiration for his business success and evolving into something deeper. She described him as someone who could offer her stability and opportunities that I couldn't provide, at least not anytime soon. Marcus owns properties worth millions of dollars, travels to Europe twice a year for business and pleasure. He can take me to restaurants where the wine costs more than our monthly grocery budget without thinking twice about it. When I'm with him, I don't have to worry about checking my bank balance before ordering dinner. I listened to Emma describe the life Marcus could provide, and I realized that somewhere along the way, her priorities had completely changed from the woman I'd fallen in love with. The Emma who used to find adventure in our financial struggles and see our modest successes as stepping stones to something bigger had been replaced by someone who measured happiness in terms of immediate material comfort. She told me about the trips Marcus had taken her on, weekends at his vacation house on the Oregon coast, and dinners at exclusive clubs, where she'd met other successful business owners. She described feeling sophisticated and important in ways she'd never experienced during our relationship. With Marcus, she felt like she belonged in a world of success and influence. What about us? I asked, though the question felt pointless. Even as I said it, what about the plans we made and the future we were building together? Emma's response was the most painful part of our entire conversation. She looked at me with something that might have been pity and said that she'd realized our plans were more like fantasies. She'd come to understand that true success required more than just hard work and good intentions. It required resources, connections, and access to opportunities that we simply didn't have. Alex, you're brilliant with technology, but business is about more than having a good product. Marcus has shown me how real entrepreneurs operate. I don't think we were ever going to reach that level starting from where we are. The words cut deeper than I'd expected because they revealed how completely Emma had lost faith in everything we'd been working toward. She wasn't just leaving me for another man. She was rejecting the entire vision of success we'd shared. Her mind, Marcus represented not just financial security, but validation that she was capable of achieving something significant. I asked her when she planned to move out, trying to keep my voice steady despite feeling like my entire world was collapsing. Emma said she'd been staying at Marcus's house in the West Hills for the past 2 weeks, only coming back to our apartment when necessary to maintain the pretense that our relationship was still intact. The logistics of ending our personal relationship were complicated by the fact that Chen Solutions was technically a joint venture. Emma owned half of our client contracts and had been integral to our sales and marketing efforts. I wasn't sure how to separate our business partnership when our personal relationship was over. Emma had apparently been thinking about this problem as well. She suggested that I could buy out her share of the company, though we both knew I didn't have the resources to do that immediately. Alternatively, she could transfer her ownership to me in exchange for my agreement not to pursue any legal claims related to the clients she'd helped us acquire. The practical discussion about dividing our business assets felt surreal, like negotiating the terms of my own failure. Emma was matter-of-fact about the details, as if we were dissolving a business partnership that had simply run its course rather than ending a relationship that had been the foundation of my adult life. She packed her remaining belongings that afternoon while I sat at my computer, pretending to work on code but actually just staring at the screen. Emma moved efficiently through our small space, taking her clothes, her books, and her personal items. She left behind most of the household items we'd bought together, perhaps because they reminded her of a lifestyle she no longer wanted to maintain. Before she left, Emma paused at the door and turned back to look at me one final time. I could see that she was struggling with some combination of guilt and relief. I was torn between regret about hurting me and excitement about the new life she was beginning. Alex, I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't really about Marcus. It's about me realizing that I want different things than I thought I did when we started this journey together. I want security and stability more than I want uncertainty and struggle. After Emma left, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. I'd gotten used to her constant presence, her phone conversations with clients, her habit of thinking out loud while she worked on marketing materials. Without her energy filling the space, I became aware of how small and cramped our home really was. I spent the evening going through our shared files on my laptop, trying to understand which clients might choose to follow Emma to her new position with Wellington Properties. Several of our contracts had been secured primarily through her relationships, and I wasn't sure whether those business owners would want to continue working with Chen Solutions if Emma was no longer involved. Tyler came over the next evening after I'd called him and explained what had happened. My brother had always liked Emma, but he'd also noticed the changes in her behavior over the past few months. He wasn't entirely surprised by her decision to leave, though he was angry about the way she'd handled the situation. She could have been honest with you months ago instead of sneaking around, Tyler said while we sat in my tiny living room, sharing a pizza and trying to figure out what came next. You deserved better than being lied to while she figured out her exit strategy. Jake Morrison's reaction was less diplomatic. When I told him about Emma's relationship with Marcus and her decision to join Wellington Properties, he was furious about what he saw as a betrayal of our friendship as well as our business partnership. Jake had invested emotional energy in supporting Chen Solutions, and he felt personally deceived by Emma's secret planning. The first week after Emma moved out was the hardest period of my life up to that point. I had to contact each of our clients individually to explain that Emma was no longer with the company, though I tried to frame her departure in professional terms rather than personal ones. 3 of our 12 clients decided to cancel their contracts, representing about 30% of our monthly revenue. More challenging than the immediate business impact was the psychological adjustment to being alone after 2 years of constant partnership. Emma and I had made every significant decision together, from choosing which clients to pursue to deciding how to spend our limited marketing budget. Suddenly, I was responsible for every aspect of Chen Solutions without anyone to discuss strategies or validate my choices. The apartment above Murphy's coffee shop, which had once felt cozy and full of potential, now felt cramped and depressing. Every corner reminded me of plans Emma and I had made together or conversations we'd had about our shared future. I considered looking for a different place to live, but the practical reality was that I couldn't afford to move while also trying to rebuild the business. Daniel Kim, a business mentor I'd met through Jake, reached out during this difficult period to offer guidance and support. Daniel had started his own consulting company 15 years earlier and had experience with the challenges of running a business alone. He suggested that Emma's departure, while painful personally, might actually be beneficial for Chen Solutions in the long run. According to Daniel, having a single decision maker could streamline our operations and eliminate the conflicts that had been developing between Emma's aggressive growth strategy and my more conservative approach. He also pointed out that I now owned 100% of the company's intellectual property and could pursue opportunities without needing to negotiate with a partner who might have different priorities. The advice was helpful, but it didn't address the emotional impact of Emma's decision to leave. I'd lost not just a romantic partner, but my closest friend, my business collaborator, and my primary source of emotional support. The vision of success we'd shared had been replaced by a much smaller and lonelier version of achievement. Christmas that year was particularly difficult. Emma and I had planned to spend the holidays with Tyler and visit my parents in Seattle. Instead, I worked through most of the holiday week, using the quiet time to rebuild our client database and develop new marketing materials. The isolation was intense, but it also gave me clarity about what I wanted Chen Solutions to become. By early January, I'd made the decision to pivot our business model toward serving larger clients rather than continuing to focus exclusively on small businesses. The software Emma and I had developed was sophisticated enough to handle more complex inventory management needs, and larger companies could afford to pay higher fees for our services. The transition wasn't easy, but it forced me to develop skills I'd been relying on Emma to handle. I had to learn how to present our services to corporate decision makers, how to negotiate contract terms, and how to manage client relationships without Emma's natural charisma and sales ability. Within 6 months, Chen Solutions had replaced the revenue we'd lost when Emma left and was actually generating more income than we'd ever achieved as partners. The larger clients required more sophisticated technical solutions, which played to my strengths and allowed me to charge premium rates for custom development work. The success felt hollow at first because I'd achieved it alone rather than as part of the partnership Emma and I had envisioned. But gradually, I began to take pride in building something that was entirely my own creation, not dependent on anyone else's commitment or priorities. 3 years had passed since Emma walked out of our apartment above Murphy's coffee shop, and I'd honestly stopped thinking about her daily. Chen Solutions had grown beyond anything we'd originally imagined, with offices in downtown Portland and contracts with major corporations across the Pacific Northwest. I'd hired 12 employees, including Jake Morrison as my chief technology officer, and we were generating revenue that would have seemed impossible during those early days of eating ramen and worrying about rent. My personal life had transformed as well. Rachel Thompson had joined our company 18 months earlier as our marketing director. Bringing experience from her previous role at a Seattle tech firm, she was brilliant, funny, and had the ability to explain complex technical concepts to clients in ways that made them excited about our solutions. More importantly, she understood the entrepreneurial lifestyle without needing constant reassurance about financial security. Rachel and I had been dating for 8 months when she moved in with me at my new house in Beaverton. It was a modest 3-bedroom place with a real kitchen, a home office, and a backyard where we could have barbecues with friends. Nothing extravagant, but it represented stability and success earned through hard work rather than inherited wealth or connections. The wedding planning had been surprisingly enjoyable. Rachel approached our relationship with the same collaborative spirit that made her such an effective business partner. We had chosen a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Portland, followed by a reception for family and close friends. The guest list included Daniel Kim, who'd become both a mentor and a close friend, Tyler and his new girlfriend, and several colleagues from Chen Solutions who'd become like family over the years. I was reviewing contract proposals in my office on a Tuesday afternoon in late September when my assistant informed me that someone was asking to see me without an appointment. She seemed hesitant to provide details, mentioning only that the visitor claimed to have a personal connection and insisted the matter was urgent. Emma Rodriguez walked into my office, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd left me for Marcus Wellington 3 years earlier. Her appearance was polished, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a designer handbag. But something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. She moved with uncertainty, her eyes darting around the office as if she were intimidating by the success surrounding her. The office itself was a testament to how far Chen Solutions had come since our days working from the kitchen table. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a view of the Portland skyline. Modern furniture filled the space with clean lines and neutral colors, and awards from business publications hung on the walls alongside photographs from company events and client celebrations. "Alex," she said, her voice catching slightly as she sat down in the chair across from my desk. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know this is unexpected, and I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me after everything that happened between us." I studied her carefully, trying to understand what could have motivated this visit after 3 years of complete silence. Emma looked older, more sophisticated in her clothing and styling. But there was a vulnerability in her expression that I remembered from our early days together, when she'd been uncertain about major decisions. Emma appeared to be struggling with how to begin whatever conversation she'd come to have. She looked around my office again, taking in the evidence of Chen Solutions' growth. Before focusing on the framed photograph of Rachel and me that sat prominently on my desk, her expression tightened slightly when she saw the picture, but she quickly composed herself. "I heard about your success," she said, gesturing toward the office around us. "Chen Solutions has become exactly what we always talked about building. Together, I've been following your progress through industry publications and social media. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." The compliment felt hollow, delivered with the kind of professional pleasantness that suggested she was building toward something more significant. I thanked her politely, but didn't offer any details about the company's growth or my personal life. After 3 years, I felt no obligation to make this conversation comfortable for her. Emma shifted in her chair, clearly struggling with whatever she'd come to discuss. She asked about Tyler, about Jake, about mutual friends we'd shared during our relationship. The small talk felt forced and awkward, like two strangers trying to fill time rather than former partners who'd once shared every detail of their daily lives. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked directly at me for the first time since entering my office. "Alex, I made a terrible mistake when I left you for Marcus. I thought I wanted security and luxury more than I wanted love and partnership. But I was wrong about everything." The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected in its directness. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she continued speaking, describing the gradual deterioration of her relationship with Marcus and her growing realization that she'd sacrificed something irreplaceable for temporary material comfort. According to Emma, the problems had started almost immediately after she'd moved into Marcus's mansion in the West Hills. While the house was beautiful and the lifestyle was luxurious, she'd quickly discovered that Marcus expected her to function more as an accessory to his success rather than as an equal partner in their relationship. "He wanted me to quit working and focus on supporting his social obligations," she explained, "attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties for his business associates. Basically being the perfect corporate wife without any interests or ambitions of my own. When I tried to maintain my career goals, he said I was being selfish and ungrateful." Emma described feeling increasingly isolated in Marcus's world, surrounded by people who were wealthy and sophisticated, but who treated her like an outsider, who'd been granted temporary access to their exclusive community. The other women in their social circle had inherited their positions through marriage or family connections, and they never let her forget that she'd started as someone's employee rather than someone's equal. Had seemed so promising initially, turned out to be largely ceremonial. Marcus had created a position for her that involved minimal responsibility and even less authority. She was supposed to look professional and attractive at company events, while contributing very little to actual business operations. Marcus became increasingly controlling as their relationship progressed, Emma continued. He monitored her spending, criticized her friends, and made decisions about their social calendar without consulting her preferences. When she expressed frustration about these limitations, he'd remind her about the lifestyle he was providing and suggest that she was being unreasonable to expect both luxury and independence. The emotional manipulation had been subtle but persistent. Marcus would alternate between extravagant gestures of affection and periods of cold withdrawal. When Emma didn't meet his expectations perfectly, he'd surprise her with expensive gifts one week, then ignore her completely the next week, if she expressed opinions he didn't approve of. Emma had tried to maintain connections with her old friends, but the gap between her new lifestyle and their experiences had made those relationships increasingly difficult. She couldn't relate to their financial concerns when she was wearing clothes that cost more than their monthly rent. But she also couldn't share her own problems without seeming ungrateful for opportunities most people would envy. The isolation had been compounded by Marcus's expectations about her availability. He wanted her to accompany him to business dinners, weekend trips, and social events that often conflicted with her own interests and friendships. When she tried to maintain independent plans, he'd express disappointment and suggest that supporting his career should be her primary priority. The breaking point had come 6 months earlier when Emma discovered that Marcus was having affairs with multiple women, including clients and business associates. When she confronted him about the infidelity, he'd been completely unapologetic, explaining that successful men like himself had different rules and expectations than ordinary people. He told me that I should be grateful for the position I held in his life and not worry about what he did with other women, Emma said, her voice filled with anger and humiliation. He said that if I wasn't satisfied with our arrangement, I could always go back to whatever pathetic life I'd been living before he rescued me. The discovery of Marcus's affairs had forced Emma to confront the reality that she'd traded a genuine partnership with me for a transactional relationship with someone who viewed her as property rather than a person. She'd realized that the security she'd thought she wanted was actually a form of imprisonment that left her dependent and powerless. Emma had moved out of Marcus's house 2 months earlier and was currently living in a small apartment downtown while trying to rebuild her career and her independence. The transition had been financially and emotionally difficult, forcing her to confront how much of her identity she'd surrendered during the 3 years with Marcus. Looking for work had been humbling because she'd lost touch with her professional network and allowed her skills to atrophy during her time as Marcus's companion. The business world had continued evolving while she'd been playing the role of a wealthy man's girlfriend, and she was struggling to reestablish credibility in her field.
Alex.
I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after what I put you through, Emma said, leaning forward in her chair with tears streaming down her face. But I need you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. Every day for the past 3 years, I've regretted choosing material security over real love. She described waking up every morning in Marcus's mansion feeling empty and disconnected, missing the excitement and collaboration we'd shared while building Chen Solutions together. The luxury had never compensated for the loss of purpose and partnership that had defined our relationship. I thought about you constantly, she continued, wondering what Chen Solutions was becoming, whether you were happy, if you'd found someone who appreciated what an incredible partner you are. I followed your success from a distance and felt so proud of what you'd accomplished, but also devastated that I wasn't part of it anymore. Emma's voice broke as she described the loneliness of her life with Marcus. Surrounded by expensive possessions but lacking any meaningful connections or personal fulfillment, she'd tried to convince herself that financial security was worth the sacrifice, but the emptiness had only grown stronger over time. I realize now that what we had together was rare and precious, she said. The way we supported each other's dreams, the way we could talk for hours about our plans and goals, the way we made each other better people. Threw that away for superficial things that never made me happy. Expression desperate and pleading. Alex, I know this is probably impossible, but I had to ask. Is there any chance you could forgive me and give us another opportunity? I've learned so much about what really matters, and I promise I would never take our partnership for granted again. The silence that followed her request felt endless. Emma waited for my response, hope and fear alternating in her expression as she tried to read my reaction. I could see that she genuinely believed there might be a possibility of reconciling, that the love we'd once shared could overcome the betrayal and abandonment of 3 years ago. I looked at the photograph of Rachel on my desk, thinking about the life we'd built together and the future we were planning. Rachel understood my ambitions without needing to be convinced of their value. She contributed to our success as an equal partner while maintaining her own identity and goals. Most importantly, she'd never made me doubt her commitment or wonder whether she might abandon our partnership if something better came along. Emma followed my gaze to Rachel's photograph and seemed to understand what my answer would be before I spoke. Her face crumpled with disappointment and grief as she realized that the reconciliation she'd hoped for was impossible. "Emma," I said carefully, choosing my words to be honest, but not unnecessarily cruel. "I appreciate you coming here to apologize. I'm sorry that your relationship with Marcus didn't work out the way you'd hoped, but I've moved on completely from what we had together." I explained that Rachel and I were engaged in planning our wedding, that my life had taken a direction that didn't include room for revisiting past relationships. Emma listened without interrupting, tears flowing steadily as she absorbed the finality of my response. The woman sitting across from my desk was no longer the Emma I'd fallen in love with years earlier. That person had been replaced by someone who'd made choices based on fear and materialism rather than love and partnership. Even if I hadn't found happiness with Rachel, I couldn't imagine trusting Emma again after experiencing her capacity for deception and abandonment. Emma gathered her purse and stood to leave, pausing at the door to look back at me one final time. "I can see that you're happy and you deserve that happiness," she said quietly. "I hope someday I can find a way to forgive myself for destroying the best thing that ever happened to me." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the unexpected encounter and its implications. Emma's visit had provided closure to questions I hadn't realized I still carried about her motivations and regrets. More importantly, it had reinforced my appreciation for the authentic partnership I'd found with Rachel and the life we were building. Together, based on mutual respect and shared values, Rachel and I got married 6 months after Emma's unexpected visit to my office. The ceremony at Willamette Valley Vineyards was everything we'd dreamed it would be. Intimate and joyful, surrounded by people who genuinely supported our partnership. Tyler served as my best man. Jake delivered a hilarious speech about our journey from struggling entrepreneurs to successful business partners. And Daniel Kim offered a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. The most meaningful moment came when Rachel's father walked her down the aisle. He'd initially been skeptical about her relationship with someone who'd started a company in a tiny apartment, but he'd grown to respect what we'd built together. During his speech at the reception, he said he'd never seen Rachel happier or more fulfilled than she'd become since joining Chen Solutions and starting our life together. Our honeymoon in New Zealand was the first real vacation I'd taken in years. Rachel and I spent 2 weeks hiking, exploring wineries, and talking about our plans for expanding Chen Solutions internationally. She had ideas about markets we could enter and strategies for scaling our operations that excited me more than any business discussion I'd ever had with Emma. When we returned to Portland, moved into a larger house in the hills overlooking the city, Rachel wanted space for a home office where she could work on marketing campaigns, and I needed room for the technical equipment that allowed me to work remotely when necessary. The house also had a guest room for Tyler's visits and a dining room large enough to host dinner parties for our employees and clients. Sophie arrived 2 years later, a perfect blend of Rachel's intelligence and curiosity. Watching Rachel become a mother while continuing to excel as Chen Solutions marketing director reminded me daily of what true partnership looked like. She never asked me to choose between family responsibilities and business growth because she understood that both were important to our shared vision of success. Chen Solutions continued expanding beyond anything I'd imagined during those early days with Emma. We opened offices in Seattle and San Francisco, hired over 50 employees, and secured contracts with Fortune 500 companies that had seemed completely out of reach when I was coding alone in that cramped apartment. The software that had started as a simple inventory management tool had evolved into a comprehensive business intelligence platform. The financial success was gratifying, but what satisfied me most was the company culture we'd created. Rachel had been instrumental in developing an environment where employees felt valued and supported, where innovation was encouraged, and where everyone understood their contribution to our collective success. We offered profit sharing, flexible schedules, professional development opportunities that reflected our belief that business success should benefit everyone involved. I occasionally heard updates about Emma through mutual acquaintances in Portland's business community. She'd struggled to rebuild her career after leaving Marcus, eventually taking a position with a marketing firm that paid a fraction of what she'd earned during her brief time with Wellington Properties. She'd also gone through a difficult divorce settlement that had left her with limited financial resources despite the years she'd spent in Marcus's world. And Marcus Wellington's empire had faced its own challenges. A real estate market downturn had exposed overextension in his investment portfolio, and several business partnerships had dissolved amid allegations of unethical practices. The man who'd once seemed so powerful and successful was dealing with lawsuits and financial pressures that diminished his influence considerably. None of this information affected my daily life or happiness, but it served as a reminder of how differently things had worked out for everyone involved. The choices we'd all made years earlier had led to completely different outcomes, and I felt grateful that my path had led to genuine fulfillment rather than temporary material gain. Tyler had become a successful graphic designer and was engaged to a wonderful woman named Maria who worked as a social worker. They often joined Rachel, Sophie, and me for Sunday dinners at our house, continuing the family tradition that had started in that tiny apartment above Murphy's coffee shop. Tyler would play with Sophie while Rachel and Maria planned charitable events for their respective organizations. Jake Morrison had thrived as Chen Solutions' chief technology officer, developing innovations that kept us ahead of our competitors. He'd also found love with Sarah, a teacher he'd met through a hiking group. Their wedding was scheduled for the following spring, and Jake had asked me to be his best man, an honor that reflected the deep friendship that had grown from our shared entrepreneurial journey. Daniel Kim had become like a second father to me, offering guidance not just about business decisions, but about balancing professional success with personal happiness. He and his wife often joined our family gatherings, sharing stories about their own journey through entrepreneurship and parenthood. Daniel frequently reminded me that the measure of true success wasn't just financial achievement, but the positive impact you had on the people around you, looking back on the path that had brought me to this point. I felt no bitterness toward Emma or regret about the painful period after she'd left. Her decision to choose immediate security over long-term partnership had forced me to develop independence and resilience that had ultimately made me a stronger person and a better business leader. Rachel often said that she was grateful Emma had left when she did because it had cleared the way for us to find each other. Without Emma's abandonment, I might never have been emotionally available for the genuine partnership that Rachel and I had built together. The betrayal that had once felt devastating had actually been necessary for my growth and eventual happiness. On quiet evenings, when Sophie was asleep and Rachel was reading in her favorite chair, I would sometimes think about the alternate life I might have lived if Emma had never left. We might have achieved moderate success with Chen Solutions, but I doubted we would have reached the heights that became possible. When I was forced to bet everything on my own abilities and vision, the boy who had once worried about making rent while dreaming of changing the world had become a man who'd actually accomplished both goals. Chen Solutions now employed dozens of families, served hundreds of clients, and had created software solutions that improved efficiency for businesses across multiple industries. More importantly, I'd found love with someone who understood that true partnership meant supporting each other's growth rather than limiting it. Emma's visit to my office had provided the final chapter to a story that had once consumed my entire world. Seeing her desperation and regret had confirmed that choosing material security over authentic connection had been as hollow for her as I'd suspected it would be. Meanwhile, choosing to rebuild my life around principles of hard work, integrity, and genuine partnership had led to fulfillment beyond anything I'd originally imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Click and check them out.